personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a very special guest on the show today, Ken Chikwanha. He is the executive head data governance, data privacy, and data protection for Standard Bank Group in Johannesburg, South Africa. Hello.
Hey, Debbie. How you doing?
I'm great. I was saying before we started recording that you don't know how excited I am to have you on the show. We have a funny backstory. So I had done a podcast with Mark Smolik, who's the head of legal at DHL Supply Chain. And you and I ended up on a call, I think, like the next day or something. You were in Australia. And so I was just blown away. I was like, oh my God, everybody's listening to this podcast. And I told Mark, I said, hey, you have people in Australia talking about your podcast. And he was so excited about that. But
that was a great show.
Yeah. And you and I had a great conversation. One of the times where I feel like we could have recorded what we said during that call. So it's great to be able to have you here.
We get a chance to do it today. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, first of all, tell me about your journey into data privacy and data protection, why that's an interest for you and what you do at Standard Bank Group.
Thanks, Debbie. And again, thanks for having me. This is, one of the highlights of the year. Honestly, this is one of the things that actually got me into the role I'm actually playing now. So, thanks for all the work you're doing. And I think all the great guests that you actually have on the show as well. So it's an absolute pleasure. So just in terms of my background, I guess I took more or less the scenic route. So I left college and I started off working with what was then called the Big Four. I don't know what it is now, but it was a Big Four doing systems implementations. And that turned into controls assurance work when I moved across to PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I've just been privileged to be working around the world, just getting to see the world, and just getting to get some of that international experience just to add to my portfolio as well. So I did work with a few of the corporates, like I said, and I did some freelancing as well, where I was doing some consulting, primarily in the information risk management space. And back then the focus was more on the technology side of it, as opposed to the actual data, which is what we're focusing on now. And I did a stint in information security as well, when I did some work with one of the banks, and a role opened up in our data management division. And back then they were looking for someone to lead data governance, and I had no idea what that was back then. It was all quite new. There was very little international precedent, and outside of academia, it was basically just you have to figure your way out. And so I took that up, and things just moved on. And with the coming of new legislation locally, especially around data privacy, a role opened up, and I guess my name was thrown into the hat, and here we are. I had no idea about what a data privacy officer needed to do, or a data protection officer, depending on which part of the world you're in. And I guess just through research, listening to shows like yours, honestly, that's the truth. Shows like yours. I also listened to there's the one that you guys also did with Jamal in the UK, Privacy Pros. Yeah, that was one of my favorite shows.
Yeah, Jamal is awesome. Yeah,
no, he's a great guy. And just networking, we ended up putting things together, and here I am. So just leading the data privacy or data protection role for Standard Bank.
Wow, that's amazing. Tell me a bit about your transition. You touched on it a bit, how you have found your transition from the IT security governance into
Mhm.
privacy? Because I think there are a lot of people who are not, for example, maybe they don't have a legal background or anything, and they're looking to move into this area. So tell me a little bit about the skills that you had that you were able to translate over into this new role.
Great. So I did quite a few different a bit of training, just a few certifications, just along the way. But the base set of skills was basically information risk management. So like I said, that ended up being more of the data governance type of focus. So my skill set is information risk, data governance, and now it's more in the privacy space because I guess the lesson out of this is I didn't need to be a lawyer, or I didn't need to have a legal mind to actually take up this role. There's specialists within the organization that actually focus on the interpretation of legislation, and so my understanding of the business, as well as my background with data governance, as well as information security, because as you can see from the title, it's actually a three-legged portfolio, which actually is part fortuitous, but it actually makes total sense because data privacy is the outcome that we actually end up chasing. That's the customer facing, that's the external facing outcome. But in terms of the actual pillars that underpin that, um, data governance, you need to know what data you have, you need to know where it is, you need to know who can access it. So things like logical access management, all those things that actually come together to form your overall data governance. Part of it as well is you need to know where the data is coming from, where you're sourcing your data from. You also need to know how you're using it within the organization, which spills over into the privacy space now. And then on the other side, just in terms of the data protection side, I think my stint in information security actually put me in good stead because once you actually understand some of the technical measures or the security safeguards, as it's called in most pieces of legislation, you actually get a full appreciation of how you actually achieve that outcome of actually protecting people's data, which ends up giving you either a good or bad privacy rep. So that's how everything's actually just beautifully come together. And it makes perfect sense in my head now because I have that background across both legs.
You're right, it does make perfect sense. And I remember when privacy or data protection, especially in the US, started to get more attention. I had told a lot of my friends who are in information governance, like, hit your wagon on the privacy stuff.
Right?
I think one reason why those two things go together is because if you do it right, you're doing it at a foundational level and you're doing it early as opposed to trying to do it in a reactionary manner. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I totally agree because those are the foundations of sound data privacy practices. You can't protect it if you actually don't know where it is. Because whether it's within the organization or sitting with your third parties or your vendors, actually having a full view of what data you have and where exactly it is, what kind of data it is as well, that actually just puts you in good stead because now you actually understand that gives context to the regulation that comes in, you know, because regulations are talking about protecting the man on the street. And one of their most prized assets is obviously the personally identifiable information. And I guess having that context actually just makes it all make sense.
I want to talk to you a little bit about data mapping. I think when I hear people talk about data mapping, sometimes it's like nails on the chalkboard for me.
Yeah, that's a scourge of everyone in business. Yeah.
Well, it's right. It's a scourge to everyone in business, but a lot of people don't do it correctly, where they look at data mapping from a narrow point of view. So they're like, let's do data mapping for governance, let's do one for privacy, let's do one for security, where it's just one data map, doggone it, and then you have to have those considerations all the way through, and in that way, you're not wasting time churning through all these little fiefdom efforts. What are your thoughts about that?
No, I totally agree. And we call it data mapping. There's data flows. So for me, it actually is all rooted in business process. Like, what does the business actually want to achieve? Because data flows through business processes. It doesn't flow through some of those departmental pockets that we normally like to talk about. So if you have the context of the business process, different business processes, you actually understand where's the data coming from, which are the touch points within the organization, who's doing what to that data in the organization, how well protected is it at every single stage, all the way from processing through storage to destruction, retention and destruction. Right across the entire life cycle, you need to have a proper lineage across the entire business process. So I think it's painful until people actually understand the value of why we're doing it. It's not just an admin chore that we're just inflicting upon people. It's actually, the more you understand how data is actually flowing through your business process, the better you can actually handle it. The better control you have over who's doing what with it within the organization.
Also, one thing that you pointed on, and you're obviously very good at this, and I'd love for you to chat more about this. And this is what I've observed with people who are very successful in a business role is that you bring your skills to the business, but you understand the business. So if you're someone who's in a business and don't understand the business that you're in, you're not going to be successful because you don't understand how the business is operating, what the business folks are interested in, right? Because privacy and governance is just a slice of what happens in a business. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I agree again, Debbie. So that's something that's actually put me in good stead again. Like I said, having worked with the actual business and understanding the actual business processes, you actually understand what outcomes they're chasing. Because the work we do it can't be done in isolation. It's not something you just come in and layer on top and hope to achieve the results. You need to understand what business is doing, why they're doing it. So you need to actually just hitch your wagon to the actual business strategy of the organization. That way, you can actually support them much better. Because business don't need to understand all the sections of a piece of legislation. They need to understand. So you need to be able to translate that legislation into workable business practices. So if your department it's a marketing department, for argument's sake, um, you need to understand where's this data coming from. You source it from events, you source it from customers who've hopefully consented to you actually using their data for some of these purposes. And understanding that full business context actually helps you to speak their language and actually get more buy-in as you go along. Because otherwise, it's just pain for everyone.
One thing that you're very good at, you had talked to me a bit about, is privacy risk management. And I want to talk to you a little bit about, I guess, the word risk. When I hear the word risk, I think, as I see legislation that brings up that word, to me, that means show your work over time, right? Because you can't know your risk unless you have data points over time. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. I agree. And I guess with risk management, I guess the technical definition is anything that stops you from achieving your business objectives, right? So you need to understand the business context. Like we keep saying, so if you understand the proper business context, then you actually understand at every point what are the things that could stop us from actually meeting our business outcomes. And with data privacy risk, for me, it's not just about collecting stats. So the data points are some of the stats that we collect. Whether it's the number of privacy or data protection impact assessments you perform, the number of breaches. You need to actually start digging a little deeper than that because we have to take learnings from all this information that we're gathering, all the data points that you speak about, and some of the insights that actually end up ensuring that the relevant monitoring of those risks ends up taking place, and that business processes are over time they eventually matured or evolve to ensure that either consumers aren't negatively impacted or that the organization isn't exposed from a legal risk perspective. going forward. So yeah, that's my take on data privacy risk management. It's something that's integral to. It's an outcome. That's why we do what we're doing. We try to manage the legal risk for the organization. It just happens to be in the data privacy context.
Excellent. So I want you to give us some insight on what's happening in Africa around data privacy and data protection and regulation. A lot of times when you hear on these shows is mostly talking about US or Europe, right? So and then now China's kind of jumped in as well. But there's a lot happening in Africa in data protection. I've been very impressed by the Poppy law. And so I would love for you to give the listeners some indication about what's happening or what's brewing in Africa that we need to know.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the commercial centers across Africa have actually started seeing the relevance of this of data protection legislation. Some of them are still at a very rudimentary stage. Some of them are still just talking about it, but a lot of countries have started enacting local data privacy legislation. And I'll take South Africa for example, because that's my current context. You know, the PAPIA Act that you speak about, it's a very comprehensive piece of legislation, and it's very comparable to the GDPR in the sense that it covers a lot of those minimum processing conditions for personal information. It goes a step further in the sense that we don't limit data subjects to being just individuals. Corporations are actually data subjects as well. So we actually look to actually protect the personal information of these corporations. So PII of these corporations would be some of your registration numbers, some of the any information that's unique to that organization that actually becomes identifiable with that organization. So the local regulator has done a lot of work, and we've also just built a great relationship with them because I like the approach that they've taken where they don't understand business the way we understand business. So they're open to that. They are the law experts. They drive the constitutional outcomes that need to filter into actual data privacy laws. So working with them, they've been very open to actually just understanding what's our context, what are the things that we're grappling with as well, just in terms of actually either interpreting the legislation or actually implementing it. To the extent that one of the associations of the banks locally, which is like an industry body, actually came up with a code of conduct, which basically takes the law and says this is how we understand it, but this is how we're actually going to implement it. So we're not overriding the law or the letter of the law, but this is how we can practically implement it, because some of the things that may be interpreted in terms of some of the principle-driven legislation, they're wide open to interpretation. So as the banking industry, people just came together and said, this is how we actually see it planning out, and the regulators approved that code of conduct, so it's actually in effect now, and that's what we're actually working with as well. So there's a lot of work going on across the continent, and I think people have realized that because data moves across borders, with adequacy rulings across, from different countries or different jurisdictions, you need to have something to show for how well you're actually going to uphold those regulatory obligations as data is passing through your territory. So yes, there is a big wake-up call, and a lot of countries are actually coming on board with that. So it makes it easier, especially working in a multinational corporation like this, to actually just understand the law and actually just make sure that whenever we do transfer data to some of those jurisdictions, it's adequately protected, and the obligations can also be upheld in those territories.
How do you keep up as someone who, you're like an international man of mystery? You're working in a multinational organization, so you need to know what's happening in all these different regions. How do you stay abreast of what's happening?
So the same way I got introduced, the same way I built my confidence, and the same way I just built my understanding of the industry is I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's just different people with different opinions. There's a lot of international guests that you actually get on these shows, like yours, and it's just hearing their stories. It actually just makes you feel that what I'm not alone. We're not doing this alone. This is actually an international situation, and we can all learn from each other. I think that's the best part of it. I do a lot of research. I like writing articles as well. So I think writing articles actually just forces you to actually research because you can't just put out stuff there that's not founded in fact or actually current. So that's how I stay abreast. And yeah, I enjoy reading. Like every single day is just I give myself that thing. I need to learn something brand new, and that's it. Whatever it is, whether it's reading about a new law in another land or just following some of these chat GPT developments.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
It's fun in games. It's fun in games. Yeah. But I saw a paper that you put out as well, just talking about some of the things that you need to look out for.
Thank you. I tell people if you don't like reading, like data protection is not the job for you because you got to read a lot. It's a lot of reading.
Constantly.
The laws are changing, the technology is coming rapidly, so you have to be plugged in to what's happening. Give me a walkthrough. Tell me, what is the day in the life of someone who's doing kind of a three-pronged job, like, the governance, privacy, and protection.
So look, you definitely have to have a strong and willing team, and they also have to be a bunch of learners because it can't just be one person who's doing all the reading, who's doing all the researching. So you have to have a strong bunch of people who actually want to actually explore. And this I like to think of it almost as a calling. It's not just a job that you do. You walk in, you walk out. A calling is something that you're passionate about, and in order to actually stay abreast and to actually do the job right, you need to be passionate about the industry. So building a great team, I think that's definitely a huge part of it. A cross section of skills because they're different aspects of the overall outcome that we're trying to achieve in data privacy. Good security people, good data governance related people, and then obviously some legal minds. You need them to sense check a lot of the time because legislation is so open to interpretation. You can't take chances with that. Even if you have a damn good lawyer. So, just working with a strong legal team as well, both within the team and within the broader organization, that's definitely a huge part of it. So, working with the senior leadership as well, because ultimately the board is accountable. Like when the organization shows up in the papers, shareholders look at the board. They don't look at everyone else underneath. So working with the board to help them to actually understand the risks that we face, as an organization if we don't actually uphold some of those requirements. So working with the board and senior leadership, understanding their strategy, and just staying close to the business because like we said, that is the context within which we operate. So working closely with the business, we have people embedded in the different business units to actually make sure that you understand the business. You don't just come with your legal hat and slap it on the table. You understand their context and actually talk them through in their language, why certain customer facing processes, for example, need to include, we need to update the agreements so that, whether it's consent that we're relying on or whatever it is, so that all these changes are actually made to these customer facing agreements. Working with the procurement, vendor management people. I don't know what you guys call them there, but to make sure that all our third-party contracts as well, they are adequately updated and they actually protect the organization, but ultimately protect the customers whose data we're working with. And then ultimately just overseeing a lot of the regulatory or regulator type engagements. So I don't know what you guys call them there.
Yes, they're regulators.
The DPA, yeah. Same thing. So just overseeing those engagements because it's good to have one touch point with the organization. So we're kind of the face of the organization when it comes to all engagements with the regulators. So when they issue whether it's a compliance assessment notice or whatever it is, we're the ones who actually end up interfacing with the business internally to make sure that we gather all the information that's required, and then just play back to the regulators the actual state of affairs, depending on what's going on in the organization. But in a nutshell, that's it. But I think one of the things that's normally underrated as well is just a lot of what we're doing is actually behavioral change management, because we're trying to change behaviors in the organization. You, legislation takes shape in the actual culture of the organization. This is what people do on a daily basis. So if we don't change these behaviors, then we really don't stand a good chance of meeting those regulatory obligations. So we do a lot of change management as well. There's a lot of awareness sessions that we hold with business, either targeted or just some of the town hall type meetings to raise awareness. Because I think the more this language becomes familiar to people in the business, it becomes not even second nature, it actually becomes first nature, because people actually understand. They read about it in the papers, they now understand how it actually applies to their business as well. So yeah, that's the long and short of it.
A typical day. Very good. I want some executive advice from you. And this comes up a lot as people who take on these roles within organizations. It's like you're a smart person, you've done all your research, right? You're showing your value to the business, but you decide that in order for you to do this, you may need to go out and purchase a tool or have the business spend some type of money or invest in what you're doing. So give me some pointers on how people can make a case for being able to get the funding for maybe a tool or maybe some other resources and things like that.
It's quite a topical one, Debbie. So I think for me, there's actually two different approaches. So you could either come with the compliance stick and beat everyone into submission, scare people, and tell them that if we don't do this, if we don't invest in this, we're going to be up the creek. The approach I prefer is obviously assess the real need for that tool, because not all tools work for all organizations, and depending on your organizational context, depending on what you already have in place. I think one thing that actually helps to get buy-in is do a proof of almost like a proof of concept or a proof of value. So demonstrate some value up front. So whether you're doing Power BI dashboards or using SharePoint slides, whatever it is, come up with a proof of value that shows this is what we're trying to do. But in order to get to the next level, if you want this kind of management information, if we want to cope with the kinds of volumes that we're going to be seeing, once people actually wake up and actually start exercising their rights, we need to actually just invest in the proper technology. So the approach I prefer is actually just demonstrate some value first, demonstrate the concept, demonstrate some value, and then once you get them on board, then it's easy to do that. The compliance stick. Look, ultimately, if you're investing company money, you're going to need to justify that. So if you can't prove that return on investment, then yeah, I guess you're going to be in a bit of a compromised situation as well.
Also, I think one thing that companies need to do, and I want your thoughts on this, you want to see what tools the company has already that you can leverage or see what those limitations are. Because a lot of times they say, well, why should we buy another tool? Because we have something that does something like this. So what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. Look, look. We come from different economies across the world, and I know there's certain economic pressures, which dictate that we need to be sensible with the money that we're actually spending in the organization. So if you've invested in, for argument's sake, Microsoft Enterprise Suite, there's things in there that you can pick on that can actually help you to either perform the tasks, whether it's workflows that you need to develop, whether it's dashboards you need to develop. There's things that you can actually leverage within the organization already. So that, for me, is a more sensible approach. But then again, like I say, depending on what you already have and depending on where you want to be, it actually, some of these tools actually come ready-made, and that can actually just help you to just hit the ground running. It also depends. Are you digitally native, or do you actually have a lot of legacy technology to actually contend with? And that will also determine which path you end up taking, because not all tools can readily interface with some of the legacy technologies that we find in some of the more established organizations.
One of the things I want to chat with you about, I want your thoughts, and this is something that I'm seeing in regulation around data privacy and data protection. So, what these regulations are doing, or what is bringing into a business process that wasn't there before, is focus on the end of life of data. So, a lot of organizations have accumulated data over the years. They've not ever deleted anything, right? So now these regulations are saying, you can't keep personally identifiable information of someone forever. And you have to have a plan, even though they may not say delete it every 3 years or something. You're like, you have to have a strategy and a plan for when you're done with that data so that you don't keep it. And then also, we know that when data has a low business value, it has a high privacy risk to an organization. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So I think the historic context, or the historic attitude of people was, let's just keep as much data as we can. We don't need to delete. I think we might use it one day. You never know, just in case, just in case, just in case. And I think that worked to a point. But now, to your point, keeping data beyond its lifespan, or beyond the purpose which you actually collected it for, is a risk from a privacy perspective, because you have to demonstrate the purpose for which you collected the data. So if that purpose has morphed over the years and you can't demonstrate that anymore, then guess what? That's a big fine coming your way. So if you can't justify it by actually demonstrating why we're actually still keeping this data, you are going to be in line for some kind of sanction. And I guess the other side as well is just, why would you want to just increase your footprint to the point that you end up incurring all sorts of costs to actually protect that data? It doesn't make that much sense. So you need to have a deliberate strategy of actually collecting it for a specific purpose, processing it, storing it, and then ultimately retiring it, or whether it's archiving it, or de-identifying it, or whatever it is, and just taking it offline or destroying it outright, so that you actually stay in line with the laws, but you also just don't give yourselves unnecessary headaches in terms of trying to protect data that's you haven't touched for the past 20 years, but that actually just exposes you from a regulatory and from an information protection point of view.
I think too, some companies, because they don't have any insight into what the data is, they're afraid that they're gonna delete something that they shouldn't or something like that. But it's like, yeah, if you haven't looked at that 20 years, you're like, maybe you should get rid of it.
Chances are exactly right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think just having a deliberate strategy around it. So, whether it's your data retention schedules, which tell you that for this type of data, we get to keep it for 5 years, or we get to keep it for 10 years, either for legal reasons or for compliance reasons. And actually just having that deliberately done throughout the different business units, it actually just puts you in a much better place. It actually makes you more defendable as well. Because if you've deleted something that ends up being called on as being subpoenaed, for argument's sake, um, you can argue that this exceeded our retention period, and in line with law A and this law, we ended up deleting it. That's more defendable than trying to defend why you're still holding on to data that you don't even do business with the customers anymore, but you're still holding on to their data.
Right. Yeah. Because I think T-Mobile had a data breach, and that's exactly what happened with them, where
Really?
they had a list of people who had applied for phones, and they had their identifying information, but it's like a lot of those people had never become customers, but you still had their data, right? So that's why they ended up having a breach. It's like, oh my God. It's like all you had to do is delete that. You need to delete it, you know?
That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. And the thing is, business context changes as well. Someone else is going to come into the organization and they see this data that's on the database. They're like, what? Let's send marketing flyers out to all these people. You start causing all sorts of friction with customers and with consumers, and again, the regulator will come knocking if you end up just violating people's rights like that. It's avoidable.
It absolutely is avoidable. But in a way, I think people have a personal attachment. They have emotional feelings about it, right? That aren't logical. So if you ask them, so why are you keeping this? And it's like once they run out of like logical reasons, they're like start getting irrational. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I agree. It's just that just in case. Yeah, we might want to touch these customers in the future. People come up with all sorts of reasons. I agree, but yeah.
Tell me a little bit about silos. So organizations, I feel like the way organizations have been created over the years, they were made almost like every little group does its own little thing and then magically things come together and that's how you do business. But when you're in data privacy, data protection, governance, you have to be able to communicate with people across all parts of an organization. And I feel like that's a skill that isn't really taught. So to me, it's like certain people really excel at learning that skill. But tell me about that part of just working with different groups who probably don't even talk to one another, you know?
hmm hmm Yeah, look, I think silos are, so they can be the downfall of a lot of business organizations. I think operationally, it doesn't make sense. If you're one organization, surely you need to be communicating, you need to be speaking. There should be one business strategy that you're all aspiring towards, right? You can't, as much as you may have your own divisional aspirations, ultimately everything needs to come together for the greater good of the organization. And I think in our world it actually ends up touching on the consumers, in that consumers don't see divisions in an organization. They see one organization. They see a T-Mobile. They see a Standard Bank, whatever it is. They don't care about, no, the marketing department said this, and then the human resources department said that. For them, it's like, no, you have my data. I gave it to you. I trusted you. But now you're coming up with all sorts of stories. So, with departments or divisions not working together, you actually end up causing more friction than is necessary with customers. But I think also with the regulatory community, when a regulator comes knocking at the door, they don't know about investment banking. They don't want to know about human resources said this. They don't want to know about all that. And they deal with one brand, and so unless you can actually ensure that these operations actually operating seamlessly, you actually do end up jeopardizing the organization and just messing around with customers as well.
Tell me, you touched a bit on it, but I want to talk with you a little bit about AI and what's happening in the world. AI is something that people are trying to keep out of, it's like a castle where it's like someone's trying to charge the castle, you're trying to close the door, but then you realize it's already in the castle. How is AI and how AI, things like generative AI being built into maybe tools that we use every day? How do you think that's going to impact, data privacy, data protection, and governance in the future? Right now, right. When I said the future, I meant like in a month or so.
Yeah, look, there's just so much going on in that world, and I think it's noble that certain communities are actually trying to come up with frameworks and legislation to actually try and rein in. I do agree that for the most part, the horses have already bolted and they're prancing around happily in the meadow. Um, so now, trying to bring it back in is it's going to be a bit of a challenge, you know. So if you take that the chat GPT we spoke about earlier, you know, this has been scraping data off the internet, data that's been around for who knows how long. So anything I've ever posted on the internet, I am certain it will actually become a part of that, that data that model ends up using. So, you know, there's the consent side in terms of I did not give anyone any permission to actually do that. However, my information is now part of a greater body of knowledge that of data that a tool like ChatGPT ends up scraping and actually using and to actually for user content. And you know, I think another risk as well is just around the content creation. But you know, the risk around that is people are doing all sorts of stuff that they hardly even understand. But they're using people's data. They start to introduce personal data in that, and you know, they get surprised at the end of the day when you know their data is misappropriated and ends up in the wrong hands. So it's there's an awareness thing, both from a user side, but I think just a control or regulatory standpoint as well. There's definitely a part that you know, regulations need to play just to try and just to try and keep it in check, because it's so wide open right now that it's scary, you know, frankly. You know, different organizations, you know, Amazon and Microsoft are backing ChatGPT. Look, I'm not going to make assumptions, but I assume that there's a reason that some of these you know, global tech firms are actually doing that. There's data at stake, and you know, people's data will end up in all sorts of places that we haven't even imagined today. So yeah, it's an interesting time. It's a little unnerving as well, I'll admit, but
Yeah, right. You can't go back, right? Yeah, but let's stop. Let's stop for 6 months and see what happens. Like, no, it's not gonna work. Not gonna work. Yeah, it's totally out. Also, I think to me something is happening with generative AI that I saw happening many decades ago around personal computing. Because remember, when computers were really expensive, a lot of people didn't have computers in their homes, that they would have them at work, for example. And then as computing got less expensive, people had computers at home that were better than the ones they had at work, right? So people were like, well, why doesn't my work computer do what my home computer does? So in a way, I see it. Right. So now I see that parallel almost in generative AI. On my own account, I can do whatever, all this stuff. But then I get to work and then I have all these restrictions. So it's almost like it's really pressing
yeah,
against
yeah.
the business to really get up the speed on generative AI. And then we're like, be cautious and do this, and people they're just going crazy. So what are your thoughts about that?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Look, a lot of organizations are coming up with policies and you know, just papers, just in terms of trying to manage the use of you know, generative AI tools within the organization. But to your point, if I can just go in and download ChatGPT on my mobile phone, um, you know, that's a backdoor that's just opened up. You know, I come back to the office the next day, and you know, we're surprised why some of our customer data ends up in some of these models. So it's yeah, it's turning into the Wild West.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely Wild West, definitely super rapid. I suspect that generative AI capabilities will be in almost any enterprise tool that you could think of before the end of the year?
Absolutely. I can't see that not going that way. Yeah, because that's the future. Like if you can use those efficiencies for your own business purposes, then what are the chances? You will end up adopting. I think it's just, is it a controlled adoption, if there's such a thing, or is it just we're just going to jump into the pool and see what happens?
Very interesting. Well, if it were the world according to you, Ken, and we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for privacy, data protection, or data governance anywhere in the world, whether it be regulation, human behavior, technology, innovation? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like that you touch on human behavior, because for me that's the crux of it. I'm all about the people, like the man on the street who doesn't know any better. So my thing, in an era where we have, the normal attitude is, I didn't read the privacy policy. Yeah, that's the default attitude for most people. I just really want people to be better prepared, um, more empowered data subjects, so that they can actually have what I like to call informed agency. So you have agency over your information, but it's actually informed. You know what you're doing. Whenever you log onto a site, it asks you for certain pieces of information. Know what information you're giving, know why you're giving it, and just be more aware of that. Because once the information's out there, we have generative AI coming down, and it's going to scrape up all that information. So I think definitely on the people side, more empowered people, more just raising awareness in the people. And then just on the other side is just more responsible, and I guess more ethical and transparent, whether you want to call them controllers or responsible parties, just to make sure that the ethical use of information is actually a key performance indicator for people within these organizations. Because beyond that, if it's left to people's discretion, they'll do whatever generates the most profit. But unless we actually do it ethically, data subjects are always going to be at risk. So those are the two things I really want to change in the world. Are you allowed to answer that question as well?
Me?
Well, you've been around for quite a while. Yeah, yeah. What's the one thing? What's the one thing for you? I'm sure it's changed, over the years.
Wow, wow. Oh my God. That's asking me my own question. Let's see.
Yeah.
The thing I really want is I would like to have, and you have this, I think most countries, other countries have this. I want privacy to be a fundamental human right all over the world. So if it becomes a fundamental human right, that fills a lot of the gaps that occur in a lot of laws, because instead of thinking about a consumer, not every human is a consumer, right? But every human has data. So if we can agree on that, maybe at a global level, I think that we can help harmonize a lot of the regulation around the world.
I like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. This has been a tour de force episode. It's great executive advice for anyone who's wearing many hats like you do and also working in multinational, because, we're all connected. So things that happen everywhere impact all of us. So I think having these conversations and knowing that we're all pretty much in the same boat, right? But just in a different jurisdiction helps us all move forward. Well, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be chatting in the future, but I love to be able to collaborate with you in the future. That'd be great.
I look forward to that, Ruby. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. All right, talk to you soon. Bye.